Thanks for coming to the Warrant Committee tonight. We have a little bit of a shorter agenda than expected because with congratulations, Chief King's wife is probably giving birth right now or just did. So we're going to postpone the police budget discussion for a couple of weeks. We still have Chief Grant here to talk about the fire budget, and then Joe Prondak will be in to talk about inspectional services. And we will start off our agenda with a review and approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes from January 18th.
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All except for one. Any opposed? Abstaining?
Yeah, I'm abstaining.
Okay.
I wasn't here.
You can abstain if you want to, but just so you know for the future, you do not need to abstain from a meeting you were not at when the minutes are voted. You can still vote on the minutes, which is the Roberts Rules rule, which might sound crazy. Abstain if you want to, but that's the rule.
That sounds crazy.
And I wanted to move into a subcommittee check-in. And Betty, you had a question. Before we do the subcommittee check-in, do you want to talk about the timing of meetings?
Well, I was just wondering, since we're coming into a pretty busy time schedule with everyone's budgets and then all of the articles that are coming forward to look at, whether or not there was any possibility we could start a little bit earlier than 7:30. So, just wanted to open that up for
Would
some
that be
conversation.
a hardship for anyone?
It's not for me. Not for me. Try to make it work. That's fine.
You can try to make it work. Okay, so maybe we do it for a couple of meetings?
Yeah, just during the budgets that are pretty lengthy and complicated would be good to do. And then maybe once we got to meeting twice a week, we wouldn't have to do that, so.
All right, well, let's talk about the schedule for a second. This is the draft schedule right now. February 1st, we will have the presentation from the Strongtown Administrator, and we will cover audit, central business, general and group insurance, law, personnel board, selectmen, town reports, unemployment. Our guests will be Amy Dexter and Michael Dennehy, and that probably will be a rather long night. Then on the 6th, we have an even longer night, I think. We're going to do assessor, parks and rec, retirement, technology, treasurer, collector, and we have a bunch of guests there, and also the playground planners are going to come in to talk about their article, which is somewhat linked to the parks and rec budget. That's going to be very full. On the 15th, we have fire needs article, plus the police budget is going to be rescheduled to that night. I've offered to try to host the Board of Selectmen to cover the Board of Selectmen articles. And so our guests so far are Steve Morash and John King. If the Board of Selectmen can come in that night, I might try to reschedule either police or fire needs, because that's going to probably be too much to accomplish because there's a ton of Board of Selectmen articles. But then again, actually, if we can start a little earlier, maybe we could make it work. 22nd is going to be the schools again, so they'll come back in and present their detailed budget, and we'll go through our detailed questions with them. Then on March 1st, we have the planning board lined up to come in and talk about their budget and their articles. And then Rick Neely is going to come in to represent the Town Government Study Committee articles, and we'll cover other budgets that aren't usually represented by somebody like our warrant committee budget, et cetera. And then we have two meetings that we can play with if we're sticking to the regular Wednesday schedule. The March 8th could be the big budget wrap meeting where we have everybody back and have final discussions. And then the 15th, March 15th, could be the contingent, non-contingent vote where we look at the big number that we're over on our non-contingent, and we start paring back and do a final vote there. And then between the 15th and the 22nd, Julia and I would be making any last-minute changes, but the warrant should have already mostly been written by the 15th, but we would make any last-minute changes that were voted in on the 15th and get the final version of it to the printer on the 22nd. That is right now how everything lines up. Amazingly, that still only uses one meeting a week, which I'm trying to do, but I have a feeling that we're going to have to pop in a Monday meeting somewhere in March, so Julia is holding this room for the Mondays in March. And keep in mind that on February 6th, that's a Monday. We're meeting that Monday instead of Wednesday because of a conflict. But still, one meeting a week so far. So It would be a little difficult for you, but maybe,
That's
even
fine.
if you came a little bit late, you know, you can still come a little
No
bit
worries.
late, and you'll just get shamed in the minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can catch up on camera. So, do people want to try 7 o'clock or 7:15? What is your?
Seven's good.
7 works for me.
Okay. So we will try 7 o'clock for a couple of weeks and see what it does to our poor secretary. And there is the schedule for now. Once I hear back from the Board of Selectmen, I will try to schedule in the Blue Hills presentation, and I will send this out to folks. But everybody else has confirmed for those dates. Any questions about the timeline?
Just a comment, I haven't received any questions about the school budget from anybody yet. I know some people said they were gonna send me some. And then I can forward them to the school administration so that they can prepare the answers I'd like to give them the opportunity to do that and meet with the subcommittee before we meet again with them in late February.
On the 22nd, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else, any other subcommittee chairs have any questions or concerns? Not hearing any. Michael, you're going to have a big night coming up soon. Are you ready to go for that with all of the government budgets? The
Yes.
general government? Yeah? Okay.
And we had our meeting.
All right. Good. Well then, would you mind coming up and joining us at the table, Chief? Thank you so much.
Evening, everybody.
Chief Grant, the new Warrant Committee.
Yeah, a lot of new faces this year.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Lucinda,
Yes.
last week, I asked each person who was the subcommittee chair over the department if they had any opening comments that they wanted to make, and so I'll give you that opportunity as well. Were there any major questions that you already discussed with Chief Grant that you want to save him the trouble of having to go through since you already investigated, or any other things you want to start with?
I'm trying to think. Maggie was with me, and Jonathan was on the telephone asking some good questions. So we had a good conversation, and I can't think of anything. I don't want to misrepresent what my committee says, but we understood what was in the budget and why he was recommending and putting the items in the budget. Any comments, Maggie or Jonathan? Okay.
All right. I just want to, just for amusement's sake, read a paragraph from last year's warrant, which probably will sound very much like the paragraph in this year's warrant. This is underneath the public safety budget on page 35. It says, the most notable change in this budget for fiscal year 17 is the addition of $75,000 in overtime for the fire department. This is half of the requested fire overtime increase of $150,000. Additional overtime funding in the form of a reserve fund transfer may be necessary for fiscal year 2017, and the fire overtime budget may need to be increased again in fiscal year 18. Requests for additional staff for police, fire, and inspectional services were all denied due to lack of funding. The Warrant Committee sees an immediate need to increase the capacity of the police department to meet present demands with 2 additional officers, as well as capacity with inspectional services with a code enforcement officer, and as soon as funding allows. Please note, blah, 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 blah. So how little things change in a year. We're here reviewing almost the same exact budget, and almost everything there has come true. Chief Grant?
It really is very similar. I went through and took a look today just to verify everything, and, for probably one of the larger budgets, it's actually really very simple. 95% of our budget's salary and wages. General expenses is at 4%. New equipment accounts for 1% of the budget. We're right at 5.3 million, in that area for our non-contingent, and 5.5 in the contingent budget. Personnel services is just over 5 million in the non-contingent and 5.2 in the contingent. The contingent contains an additional lieutenant's position and a $75,000 increase in overtime. And I would say if during this process, if any money becomes available in the non-contingent, that I would request consideration go to that overtime line.
Great. Well, I'm sure that one of the questions that we should process through, although I processed through it last year, is what drives that overtime number? Can you give us some talking points on the necessity for it?
And I think, it's funny, I think we kind of clarified some things last year, and one of the things that I had said was it's probably not the best term to term it, although it is, it's probably not the best term to term it overtime. Because the way we function, it's a product of supplementing the manpower. The overtime gets created due to the fact that we run the groups at full strength. I've got 3 out of 4 groups that are staffed with 14 members and one that's at 13. It takes 11 members to maintain all the apparatus that needs to be on the road on any given day. So, with a combination of, sick time, injury, personal days, vacation, if that number drops below 11 is when we come into an overtime situation. And like I say, the overtime's necessary to keep all of our apparatus on the street and keep the town properly covered.
Okay. Questions, folks? This is Mary
So
Lou?
could you clarify for me, please, the number of firemen that we have in town? Is it 55, I had heard? Can you tell
Total
me?
is 56.
56?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and they're all full-time?
They're all full-time, all but one works a shift, meaning that they're on the apparatus responding. The other position is our fire prevention officer.
Okay.
And he works a day shift.
Okay, I see. And then can you clarify for me a little bit about the kinds of things that you respond to in addition to fire, please? And how we use our apparatus for those kinds of
Yep.
calls?
If you can't figure out what's going on at your house, you're calling me. So really, anything under the sun. Odd smells, odd sounds, all kinds of motor vehicle accidents. We respond on all medical, any outside fires as well. Like you say, there's just animals in your house. We literally get called for everything. If there's something that you don't know how or don't want to deal with, we're getting the phone call.
Okay.
And
Do you respond with the trucks for
Yes,
the
we
odd
do.
smells?
we respond with the trucks for everything. And
Because,
this is one of the questions that I answer most frequently. I always kind of start with, take a cardiac arrest, for instance. We respond with a crew of 3 people.
okay,
It's perfectly suited to start working a cardiac arrest patient. You can have 2 of the firefighters get off, and they're gonna start team CPR. The 3rd firefighter is gonna get the defibrillator ready, and they just go. So in that regard, like you say, they're a perfect team for that operation. The, segue into the other portion of that question, a lot of times what comes up is, why can't you take a smaller vehicle to those runs? We respond, whenever the call comes in. Everything we do is time sensitive. So if we're on the way back from one of those incidents and we get another call, and let's say we were on a medical, now we're going to a head-on crash. We've got the jaws of life on the apparatus. If
Okay.
it's a
Makes
fire,
sense.
obviously those tools. Basically, any piece of apparatus we have is a great big toolbox, and all the tools are
Okay.
there for whatever, we're gonna come across.
okay, beautiful.
Chief Grant, how many vehicles do you have that are smaller than a fire truck?
We've got, the deputy chief operates out of an SUV. Fire prevention also operates out of right now a sedan. When that comes up for replacement, we will shift that to an SUV as well.
Okay.
I have an SUV for myself, and then we have 2 pickup trucks.
Okay.
One is outfitted as a brush truck for getting into the woods and fighting any brush fires.
Okay.
The other is four-wheel drive, but it's more set up as utility. We've also got a plow to take care of any of the properties.
But I just wanted to illustrate that for most calls you get, you probably don't want to be responding in a pickup truck or a sedan.
Right, yeah.
So
well,
like the difference between the two vehicles is huge.
It's funny, the sedan that fire prevention currently operates in was my vehicle when I first got the job. And I just found it not impossible, but very difficult to function out of at an emergency scene. So when I had the opportunity, I stepped in, and like I say, over time, my intention is to get rid of any sedan-type vehicle and operate out of only SUVs.
Chuck?
So is
Oh,
this
sorry.
kind of response with typical for towns like Milton? Do most towns in the Commonwealth respond with their emergency vehicles to all kinds of medical and
Yes.
other emergencies?
Yes.
This is sort of the standard.
This is,
you would say.
yeah, it's in, it's actually not even the state, it's kind of the accepted standard
Okay.
nationwide. It does branch out into that, there are, good many departments that operate a fire-based ambulance
Team,
service.
yeah.
Right. So they'll supplement and have those vehicles, but they're also still responding. In this town, we've got, 3 stations, each with an engine in it. So depending, most towns this size are operating with 1 ambulance. Some may have 2. But, depending on where the call is, there's a good many times that the fire gets there ahead of the ambulance.
I know.
So,
Thank
You
you.
good, Mary Lou?
Yes, thank you.
Hold on one second, Maggie. Chuck, did you have
I was just gonna say, we talked a lot last year about the health, everybody's health, because that drives overtime. So I was just gonna ask, how's everybody doing health-wise? It's a little
let me think.
lucky or unlucky as the year goes.
Not terrible, not terrible. One currently out, one preparing to go out, and overall during the course of the year, there's been some lost time, but it hasn't been a horrendous year. And I was just gonna do the same thing.
I don't know, my hair in my head, I don't know, I gotta find some wood.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things where you can think you're cruising along, and then all of a sudden you get hit. And luckily we had one out for a couple of days. It looked like it was going to be a couple of months, and it turned out that they were able to come back. So we dodged a little
For a lot
bit.
of reasons.
I think I know the answer, but I'll ask anyway. So how is overtime going?
Right
Year
now,
to date.
there again, knowing that we're underfunded, as a matter of fact, I meant to bring the exact figures over as to where we are. We're probably 60% through our expenditure.
Amy has something to add to that, I think. Do you want to pop up here, Amy?
Yeah, we looked at it through 6 months, and if you annualize it, the overtime line, it's gonna be around 430 to 450,000 this year.
Which means we might need a reserve fund transfer to
Yeah,
cover
it's
that.
about right where it was last
Yeah,
year.
we've been, at this point, I really do pretty much know where it's going.
Maggie, did you have something?
Yeah, we had the privilege, the subcommittee, of meeting with Chief Grant, and I have to say, I was just so amazed with everything that you do for our town, and I want to thank you. And he was nice enough to give us some time to tour the fire station behind Town Hall, and the deplorable conditions, that will be for another time, regarding their space needs, as far as the way these poor firemen, if you have not gone out and visited the fire station behind me, I beg you to do this. You need to do this, because these are the people that take care of us. And we're not taking care of them. They're living in substandard squalor conditions. It's terrible. I also visited the East Milton Fire Department. I'm going to tell you, the firefighters are the nicest people. They're most accommodating. They're so helpful. But I'd like Chief Grant to explain something that besides the building, that really shocked me, and I found that for public safety purposes, it's something we really need to address as far as the equipment and the communications. He's working off of his dad's, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Cards. I'm talking cards. They don't even have a computer. This is our fire department. He pulls out, if I'm on my street, he has to pull it out and look. But you know what most of the fire men do? They say, oh, they use their cell phone or something. Because these cards look like they are from the Stone Age. I was blown away. You need to go check out and he says everyone's welcome. Take a tour right behind here and look at the equipment or the non-equipment they have. It's amazing.
And to add into that, I didn't point out some of the things that we reviewed also, was that he has in his non-contingent budget for the fire department, requested some of $57,000. What it's really doing is he's trying to get the street directories and the fire hydrants on the computer so that it's much more efficient, because I do agree that I learned Fortran programming when I was in high school. And we used to use those cards, those index things. It's a hell of a lot easier to use a computer, so.
Would you
that was
like to
one thing.
expand upon that?
Yeah,
was an
that,
eye-opener.
it is one of the things that is one of my big focuses for the new equipment request this year, is to get, and it's really not even in the stations, it's actually on the apparatus, is get that technology there. You know, like she was saying, the cards were drawn at my kitchen table when I was a kid by my father.
Wow.
And it's, you know, it's a breakdown of, you know, each individual street, so we can look them up individually, you know, with the hand-drawn hydrant locations in them. And that was done in the early 70s, and we're still operating off of them. They're getting pretty beat up. There has been, you know, new streets added that we've had to, it's way past time to get this project done. You know, there was a period of time leading up to me coming into this office when, you know, in Chief Larson's final few years, where his new equipment line was actually zero. And I believe that took place for 3 years. And he was able to get, you know, the committee here to restore that to $60,000 for the first year that I came in. So we've done a lot of catch-up in that period of time. And, you know, so now we're at the point where we can start to take on these kinds of projects. And it actually goes beyond, you know, having the ability to look up street locations and hydrant locations. You know, you can take a complex like Curry College or Milton Academy, and all of those buildings are sprinklered, and they have standpipes in them. And, you know, just quickly, what a standpipe is, in reality, is a hard-piped indoor hose system, so that we're not, you know, dragging 500 feet of hose line in from the front door up to the 3rd floor. You know, the pipe runs up in the stairwells, and we can tie to it on that floor. There's always tie-ins to those outside the building. And, you know, if you look at these complexes that have, you know, dozens of buildings, you know, remembering where each one of those are is quite a task. And it's one of those things where currently what you do is even upgrading technology we will still do. You know, you drive through a couple of times a year just to familiarize yourself with it. But that kind of information can go on, you know, these computers, and you have it on a fire scene. You can have the layout of the building, you know, especially if it's in a fire condition, you know, you can see, you know, how many apartments are on each floor and what the layouts are, and there's tremendous advantages to it. So, you know, that's one of the things we really, really want to accomplish this year. You know, some of the other things we're looking at, and it's kind of haphazard. I've got a request into capital needs now to do over the internal communications, because, you know, we were just calling up, we generally use Comptronics to repair any of that equipment. And, you know, we were having them out twice a month to repair it. So that's in the midst of being replaced. One of the other things that I've got to look and rebuild is the external radio system. And I don't have any cost figures on that as we sit here today excuse me, for a couple of reasons. And what I'm going to look to do, it doesn't have to be done all in one day, you know, so I'm going to look to see what I can take out of my 17 equipment money and start moving forward, and I'll probably change some of the priorities in 18 and potentially into 19. What's taken place there is basically the same thing. It's issues with the Verizon lines that tie these things together, and they're very difficult to chase down when there's having issues with them. And we've been fighting an issue now for better than 2 months, where it's in, it's out, it's in, it's out. We have the ability to borrow a channel from Norfolk County Control when it's down, but that's not something you can do long term. We have a bunch of things over there that are at or coming up on end of life. And as you know, we're doing a space needs study and looking, at moving into new buildings, somewhere in hopefully the not too distant future. And you're trying not to spend, good money after bad and hold out. So we're just getting to the point where some of these things we can't wait on. On the external radio system too, some of the things that are, going on was federally, there's some legislative changes that were being proposed that are potentially going to take what we're using now and just take it away, and we'd be using something else. So there was a period of time where they said, just don't make any changes to your system. Now it looks like, just to go over it real quick because it gets technical, what happened was there's a big broadband network that was floating out there that public safety wanted to get a hold of, in times of, terrorism or, major regional storms or whatever, where you could, strictly use that system just for public safety and have interconnectivity, say, up and down the coast or even nationwide. In return for getting that block of space, they were going to take what we're currently on, what they call a T-band. And when they took a quick look at the overview of the country, there was only a handful of areas that utilized that. So they said, all right, we'll give you this, but we're going to take this back and rededicate it. What they didn't realize was it was every major city in the country that is using it. So it's small sections of the country. So what it's looking like is that it's either going to be very delayed or it's not going to happen at all. Mm-hmm. So, you're kind of rolling the dice a little bit, but again, we're at end of life, so I've got to start, rebuilding that. So it's like I said, it's one of those things where I want to keep the new equipment a little bit fluid over the next couple of years and shift priorities in and out and get some of these things done.
As we mentioned, your budget this year is remarkably similar to the budget last year. One way I noticed is on your salary and wages, where your non-contingent number is very similar to your fiscal year 17 appropriated. So usually we're used to seeing whatever the contracted rate is increase, a couple of percentage points
Yes,
or whatever. Can you
yes.
comment on what's going on there?
Yeah, what Amy called it, she knew that was going to come up. What happened was last year at this point in time, we were just wrapping up an arbitration settlement, and the pay took place during that year there. So what you're seeing is a lot of retroactivity in that. So that's why the new number looks close to that. The last year's number was artificially high.
Okay.
And how many years, are we done with, how many years?
Yeah, they're done again.
They're done again,
They're currently
that's what I thought.
negotiating, yeah, and I believe they're out of contract this year.
So you'll have the same issue with the police, that maybe it won't be as obvious, but both the police and fire contracts expired on
Expired at the
June
same
30th
time.
of 16. The numbers that are submitted in those budgets, the salary and wages, are based upon the 16 contractual amount, so it's 2 years behind. So you have a separate article, it's usually in the front of the warrant for a wage set aside for collective bargaining units. That's where you'll see the monies put aside for this, because what happens is we appropriate it in that article, and then once the contracts are settled, I'll transfer it to the appropriate
wherever
department,
it
but
needs
we
to
don't
go.
know how much it is, so they don't put it in their budget. So keep in mind, that set aside is gonna be probably double what it was last year, because this is 16, right? So you need to reflect, you need to compound it for 17 and 18.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
that's
so
why it
they
looks
settled
so
at the
low.
end of their 3-year cycle and were really immediately right back in the negotiations, so.
Okay, because I had written down when we met that the contract was settled in FY '17, so I'm getting confused.
I think it was settled in FY '17 for 16 and prior.
Oh, okay, I
So we
misunderstood
paid
that.
retro in 17
Okay,
for 16, 15.
And 14, right?
Yeah.
Right, it's settled out almost on June 30th even.
okay.
Yeah, it
So
was,
it was really fully expired by the time it was settled.
Any other
And that was
questions?
covered in the warrant.
Sorry, I didn't hear
I'm
what you
sorry.
said.
I was just clarifying, because I had misunderstood this. The wage was set aside for that in a previous warrant.
it was in the May 2016 warrant. There would have been an appropriation
Okay.
for a set aside that included,
16 would well include the upcoming
it
16
included
year.
17.
Yeah.
But the year before, May 2015 would have taken into account some of 16. He still fell kind of short, I think, because the set aside doesn't usually, it's usually just for straight wages. It doesn't, we don't
Yeah.
attach any on for overtime, we don't attach any on for personal sick leave, that kind of stuff. So
You're right.
he ends up having to absorb some
Okay.
in his budget just because we don't
We actually
projected
did, we
on
actually
those
did come
other
up a little bit
incentives.
short.
Yeah.
But we were able to cover it because last year was actually a light year for injury and that, so we actually had a little bit of money there. So we didn't have to come to you guys, but we did have to, do a 3% transfer to cover over on the personnel side.
Got it.
I saw a question over here, Michael.
Yeah, I was looking around for my favorite report, that fire incident reporting system.
Your favorite and my least favorite.
Your least favorite. I know you don't like it very much, but it helps, kind of see how, and I couldn't find anything except I have the 2015 numbers for the whole state. How do we do with fires? Like it says the statewide structure fires are down. I think that fires are, there are fewer and fewer fires that you're responding
We actually
to.
were relatively quiet this year.
Okay, and other fires were up 28% in the state. It has a picture of a tree. So was it, were tree houses burning or something? What was it?
Well, to be honest with you, it was a busy year with wildland fires in different sections of the state.
Drought.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, there were some not incredibly large events, but pretty significant events around the state.
Well, I just hope that's a tradition that continues with the Warrant Committee, that people look at this fire incident reporting system report
It's a
every year.
I-
The state publishes it, and it just says how
But you
how
must have
busy the
gone
firemen
online.
are.
You've gone online somewhere to look it up.
I
under-
did.
under-
Mass.gov.
Oh, I could go there.
Okay, and a couple, just to follow up on what Chuck asked, has anybody been out of work for like more than 3 months continuously, long-term disability? Well, we know of one firefighter that's
Yes, yeah.
out, excluding that individual.
Other than that, well, there was two, and one of them's back at this point in time and doing well. So I still have one out, but yeah, nothing else that was really long-term.
Have you had like an impartial medical exam of anybody?
Not at this point. Not at this point in time.
But is there a policy to do that if you need?
There is, yes, yeah.
Okay. And how about fire prevention activities? I remember asking that question, like I found in your charter, that was a thing that fire departments are supposed to do.
Oh, well, yeah, we have a fire prevention officer. We don't do a lot of external programs because we just don't have the funding to do it. Really, fire prevention is, he's out doing inspections on, on oil burner removals, oil installations, gas stations, liquor licenses. He'll do, the deputy chiefs on duty do a lot of the smoke detectors. Yeah, if there's questions on them, they'll refer them to the fire prevention. Program-wise, we do a couple of things, and they're mentioned in Schedule B. There's a SAFE grant, and this SAFE grant in the last two, this is probably the third year, has evolved. It was always geared towards youth. They've now started a senior SAFE program as well. So in the youth end of things, Metro Fire has a SAFE trailer that's available. It's simulated, kitchen, bedroom, living room. They'll be able to put smoke into it, set the smoke detectors off, show the kids, don't touch the stove here. If there is smoke, get down, get out of the house this way. We run through every school with that, I think kindergarten, first and second grade. And that's funded with a small state grant. It's about $5,000. The senior SAFE grant is in the $3,000 range. And they've gone in and done some talks at Council on Aging, and with them, same thing. You're looking at stove safety. Don't wear loose clothing. Keep your handles of your
Right.
the pots facing in. Don't overload your house with extension cords, that kind of thing. And then the other thing they do is purchase smoke detectors, and anybody who's having difficulty financially, we'll go in and install smoke detectors for them. So that's really what the program that we have is.
So it's like $8,000.
It's about $8,000. Yeah. Yep.
Listen to the wage set aside is Article 8. It's on page 25 of the last warrant. Okay. Anybody else? Last question?
Just one last question, please. We've been thinking about vehicle maintenance for other departments in the town, and so I wanted to ask how we're doing. Is the town able to do most of the maintenance on your fleet? How much do you have to send out? Is there a delay in time?
I'm glad you brought that up. It's Amy and Emery and Mike and I have had this conversation. I think we talked about it at our meeting. I said, and I'll say right now that this is probably even and above finding some extra money that I can throw at overtime. If we can find a way to take a mechanic out of the contingent budget and get it done in the non-contingent budget, that is a huge need for us. The way the setup is currently working is
You mean
really
a mechanic at
failing the
consolidated
fire
facilities,
department.
right?
Yes, yeah.
So you end up sending your vehicles out to
Some of it
private-
gets sent out for, and then, quite honestly, some of it just doesn't get addressed until it becomes,
Problematic.
a
Yeah.
breakdown rather than,
Breakdown,
yes, yeah.
Do we have a dollar figure?
And, it's one of those things, they're just understaffed and, for what we have underqualified as well. There's all kinds of certifications that are required to work on fire apparatus.
Sure.
And we've got an engine coming sometime just after the beginning of the fiscal year. And, the price tag on that's right at $500,000. 5 years from now, we'll be buying another, pretty much every 5 years, because we've got 3 frontline engines. It just makes sense, buy one every 5. And, they're never on the road as a frontline piece of apparatus for more than 15 years. Then we take the piece that came off the road and save that as a backup for another 5. So in theory, if everything holds together right, all the frontline stuff is less than 15 years old, and there's nothing on the street that's over 20 years old. So in the next period out, though, you're going to have 1 year an engine purchase, and then you're going to have a ladder truck purchase. Like I say, the engines are right at $500,000 right now. A ladder truck is anywhere from $750,000 to $1 million. So it's expensive apparatus, and it just makes sense to maintain it properly.
Peggy?
I Did I misunderstand you? I thought when we spoke, you said some of the vehicles are serviced by the DPW, but then I think I just heard you say consolidated facilities.
Did I say, if I said that, no,
I
if
said it.
Oh.
I was
it'd be central maintenance, which is part of DPW.
But then some of the larger, like ladder trucks, they're much more complicated, and they don't have the right technicians that are certified to clean those large vehicles, to
Yeah,
service them.
they get some of the work done, and, I will say, Brian Carroll's the mechanic down there, and what he can get done is
Right.
amazing.
Okay.
He really, we had the ladder truck actually fail a cert ladder test. You're supposed to have these things ladder and pump tested, depending on what the piece of apparatus is, annually. And, we're just operating on such a tight budget that I don't even attempt to do that. So what I look to do is do them every other year. So we'll do, 2 engines one year, 2 engines in the ladder the next year, and the ladder just didn't pass this year. And I think he got the whole thing back in order on his own without having to send it out, but it's a big task to ask of one person.
Any other questions on the budget? Betty?
Just an observation, I just did a little head count. You've got 45 employees that are 10 years plus in the department, so I would think that impacts vacation time and personal days.
It absolutely does,
Which has a
yeah.
huge impact on you trying to juggle your schedule with people, because I know last week when Joe was here talking about the DPW, he has an administrative assistant who he shares with conservation. And because they transferred from a different department, they have 5 weeks vacation. So he was just talking about right from the start, between vacation and then sick time and personal days, which you're entitled to.
Yep.
He's, not covered, so many percentage of the year. So I'm thinking that must impact.
That absolutely plays into it. Like you say, after 10 years, they're picking up a 3rd week of vacation. I'm sorry, after 5 years, they're picking up a 3rd week. After 10, they're picking up week 4, and then after 20, they pick up 5. So yeah, the older the department gets, the more time they have coming to them. And it's funny, because there was always someone who had asked, what causes the overtime? And I'd always say it was a combination of everything. And, they just couldn't see that, and said it's a combination of everything. And like you say, the number of, we got quite a few employees that are over 20 years, so there's a lot of them maxed out at 5 weeks vacation.
Did I see something? Michael?
Yeah, just follow up on this vehicle maintenance. We're trying to get a number to justify, make it, the economic case for getting another staff person at DPW. So if you could give us that number for what you spend on vehicle maintenance outside of...
Honestly, I don't know, because it's handled out of the DPW's budget, central maintenance.
So DPW knows that number?
They would know that number, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, knowing, that their budget's tight, you probably hold off on some things that and the pump and ladder test being one of them. I understand it's his budget, so, I'm not doing what I should be doing.
Motion to approve the budgets as presented? Second.
Chuck, discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, sir, for
Thank you.
coming in.
Thanks for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you
Have a good
very
night,
much.
everybody.
Thanks for all you do for us.
Thank you.
Joe, you want to join us? Do I need to refer to you as the $1 Million Man now?
Well, you can. Hopefully, it won't be again.
You want to tell them why?
Yeah.
Joe Prondak, Building Commissioner.
Did you hit the lottery?
No, we took $1 million last year.
Okay, yeah. That's right.
So sure, I'll start with that. Well, so last year, I have my numbers on permit fees. On top of permit fees, we have what we call reconciliation fees. Somebody builds a big project and then they spend more than what was originally budgeted, and we go back and get the true number and assess a fee to that additional money. That's that's not a number to easily pinpoint for the upcoming year, but the permit numbers, the permit fees themselves, so last year, just in permit fees, forget all the other sundry numbers, we took in $955,420. And so at the halfway point, as of today, in permit fees, we've taken in $581,162, so a little bit up from last year. And so the projection is good. The economy's still looking good. A little concerned that the hike in interest rates may have an effect on construction, but this is all crystal ball stuff. We just don't know exactly how much we're gonna get, but things are still looking positive from that aspect.
And I think before you came in, I read a paragraph from last year's warrant comment about the public safety budgets, and your budget is remarkably similar to what was submitted last year. Your full-time zoning enforcement agent was approved by the Personnel Board last year, approved by the Board of Selectmen, and endorsed by the Warrant Committee.
Yep.
We didn't end up doing a contingent budget last year, but there's essentially no change. But Lucinda, do you have any opening comments before Joe jumps in with?
Well, that was going to be one of my comments,
Okay.
talking about his fees that he's been collecting. And you've been approved to have the person, what's his name?
Zoning enforcement officer.
Yes, that person should definitely have the time to be able to go around and, file some more, give some more,
Enforcement.
right.
To
And bring
zoning
more
and
money in.
zoning
So he's going to
infractions.
become a profit center, and he wants to lobby for having it all go back to you, right, instead of the general fund.
I'll take that suggestion.
That's just my humor tonight. So anyway, so his budget is pretty much how it has been, and, we went through line item by line item. We have, this is the thing that we finally realized after asking him, that under contracts, that some people don't realize, that we have a $5,400 contractual fee online permitting system. That's for the permitting system where you go in and ask for your permit and all.
Sounds like it's getting good use.
Yeah, it is, so I think that's getting a good return. And, let's see, well, number 2 is, miscellaneous, that was a big thing, for me anyway, that's the zoning board of appeals. And that's where you pay for certain
Pays
aspects.
half of the salary, I
Right.
believe. The full salary, because they don't have a staff, it's
Right,
under his budget.
so,
correct?
Well, what happened a couple of years ago was, because one of my full-time clerks is actually part-time for the zoning board of appeals and part-time for our office. So inspection services has 1.5 clerks, and zoning board of appeals has half a position. Rather than have the 2 separate budgets, we took the zoning board of appeals budget and put it under inspectional services. So within that budget, I mean, the salary is still under the salary schedule. But that can be also a moving target as far as mostly postage. The biggest expense with the zoning board of appeals is postage and required mailings, certified mailings. It's $5 a pop. And if somebody applies and you have to do the abutters within 300 feet, and there's especially in the denser districts is where you get the more mailings. So it's always kind of a moving target on postage. And that's where a lot of that, we have been keeping a little cushion there, so we would like to continue to do that. We have, Chief, you brought up about technology, and we have been at the end of the years, over the years, been trying to, I don't want to, I'm not the best at technology, but get a lot of our paper stuff onto electronic formats. And that's a time saver. For example, when somebody comes in and says, well, can I see, the plans for my house that was built in 1952, rather than searching through index cards and then coming down into the archives, which are across the hall, and digging through piles of plans to find the right number and pull out the plans, send it out to get copied, we simply pull it up on the computer, print out a copy. So zoning board of appeals files also across the hall, one of the archive rooms, those, we are out of space. We're taking in stuff and nowhere to put them. So our goal is to, get some of that stuff digitized, and we recently, over at the, we bought 4 file cabinets over at the W.B. Mason store in South Boston, the used cabinet store, and because a lot of the files were in, quite frankly, in bankers' boxes, and have been for years, and every time you moved it, the banker's box, they would start falling apart. And we're responsible to take care of those records. That's where a lot of our focus is, on any leftover money that we might have in expenses. And again, the salaries, pretty much the same, other than the contractual increases, and the potential for another person to do zoning enforcement. That's where we're falling short.
Yeah, I'd love it if you would say a few comments about that. You gave us a good write-up in your narrative, and Lucinda just mentioned it, but the folks watching at home don't have access to that. So would you mind just giving us some high-level why that
Sure.
position is important to you?
So with the good economy, of course, comes increased building permit activity. With increased building permit activity becomes increased reviews for permitting, increased inspections, re-inspections. There's a lot to giving out a permit and then following through on the permit process, especially when projects are so, everybody comes in with a plan, and here's what I'm going to do to my house, and they have this grand scheme on papers, but as they get going, things change, and, beam sizes and insulation factors change, and there's a lot of follow-up in the building permit process, and the more building permits, the more follow-up. So that takes away, and people are paying significant permit fees for us to do our job in that area, as opposed to the zoning enforcement, which is an important part of the protection of property values in the town. For example, people keeping unregistered cars on their property, or junk cars, just junk and debris stored on properties. Those are some of the bigger zoning issues, but it also gets into unpermitted dwelling units, illegal apartments, and things of that nature. So it's a challenge. We can't keep up with the number of complaints and the service that's required to follow through on that, and to ultimately get abatement of the violations.
Maggie?
I just have a comment. You do have a very small department, but you do take in quite a bit of money for the size of your department. I mean, alone, and almost $1 million in the permit fees that you did last year, and you're gonna be probably reaching that this year and then some. So I guess I'm finding out by speaking with other department heads that they do their own billing and collection. And I meant to ask you this, so does your department also have to follow through and do your own collecting of the fees and the monies?
Yeah, somebody applies for a permit for a project, they'll also submit what we call a schedule of values. In other words, here's how much the building will cost, the electrical, the plumbing, the mechanical. We separate all those out and assess a fee to each
Oh,
portion of
so
that.
they pay right up front?
Before they get a permit.
Oh, that's perfect.
So,
That's
yeah.
great. There's no collection activity there.
Doesn't that tie in with the contractual thing that we do with the permitting system?
Well, the permitting, the electronic permitting system, I don't even know how to put it. But for example, all these reports are generated
Yes.
from the electronic
Right.
permitting system.
Right.
So somebody applies for a permit, we'll take a set of plans and we'll do a review, and then we'll put the notes into the chat feature in that system, and then ship the chat off to the applicant. The applicant can then read that and respond and deliver whatever materials were missing or needed updating. But there's a fee calculator and a financial system that maintains all of these records. So one of the great things about the electronic permitting system is that unlike the Board of Appeals situation where the files just keep growing and growing, we've stopped adding to our paper files. And a lot of the electronic plan storage, we won't, they get uploaded right into the system. And now with the cloud, there's no issues of storage capacity. So it's becoming, it's not without its issues, but it's becoming a better and better thing. And it just keeps improving over time.
One
I just
second,
have
Jonathan.
With respect to this proposed,
Jonathan. Brian was before you. I'll come to
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
As it relates to the zoning, back to the zoning enforcement agent position, I believe term was put around that it's a revenue generating position.
Not
And I
true.
realize not true?
Not true.
I thought
Absolutely
I
not
heard,
true.
I thought I heard
Zoning-
someone say.
It's a common misconception
Okay.
that zoning enforcement administration will generate revenue. What ends up happening is the fine system, ultimately, you spend more money chasing the fine than you actually do get. Our goal as administrators of the zoning bylaw is to abate the violation, not to collect the fine. And only the court system really can issue the fine. And in courts, especially the one we would use, which is Quincy District Court, very reluctant to. They're looking for the same thing we're looking for. They're looking to abate the violation, close the case.
It's much more indirect. It's preservation of the value of
Yeah. and,
properties.
you
It's
know, yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
We do have written into the bylaw the potential to write tickets for certain violations with a certain fine attached to those. But again, you end up spending more time chasing the money than you'll ever get. We did try several years ago, while we were inquired with Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, Lehane, Town Council, to see if we could somehow attach those delinquent or uncollectible tickets to the tax bill, and it's just not allowed by law, period. So there's, in many, many years ago, the clerk of the Quincy District Court, when that ticketing system first became available, was first written into law, the clerk of Quincy District Court said, "We will not make this court a collection agency for cities and towns," and they simply don't. So it will always be an expense. That's just the non-sugar-coated bottom line.
Thanks for clarifying.
I just have,
Jonathan, thank you.
that was
for-
actually my
You're
exact
good?
question.
You're all set?
That was my exact,
Okay.
I was just curious.
I don't know
Exactly.
if anyone has the answer. I know that certain departments are able to attach liens to people's homes, like water and sewer. If you don't pay it, you could have a lien, maybe I'm incorrect. So what is the difference? Why are some departments allowed to attach liens to homeowners' houses and something like this is not?
One of the reasons, for example, take a 2 or 3 family house where a tenant has an unregistered car on the property. It's really the tenant's responsibility. If we're fighting with the tenant trying to collect that money, we can't then attach to the owners. You know, it's just considered as unfair. The punishment would actually go to the non-offender. So I think that's part of the reason. There may be other reasons.
I don't really know.
But that's certainly one of them. That came up in our discussion with John Flynn back when we were looking into effective way of ultimately collecting.
Anything else on the budget? I'd just like to say that in terms of doing more with less, or what you have, your office has certainly done that. And to have your permitting over $1 million with having asked for so little over the last many budgets, I'm supportive of the new position. I was last year, and thank you for everything you do.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Motion to approve budgets as presented?
Second.
I heard Maggie, she gets it. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Okay.
All those opposed? None? And 1 abstain? Great, thank you so much for coming in.
Okay, folks, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to let folks know that I had a brief meeting earlier today with Amy and Mr. Dennehy to just talk about how the process is unfolding for Mr. Dennehy's presentation here next week. He's made some progress on the budget and looking forward to coming in here next Wednesday to present the budgets to us. They also had some updated information from the governor, which came with some great news and some not so great news. So in the end, it was pretty much a wash today, the way the numbers went up and down. It seems like the deficit for the non-contingent number is still right around 1.5 million, which is about what they presented to us in early, very rough numbers. Some of the numbers have changed, but the grand picture has not. There's still some refining to do over the next week, but Mr. Dennehy will be in here next week to present that to us. Anybody have any questions about the schedule or anything else before we adjourn for tonight?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Betty, thank you. All those in favor? Unanimous. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.